Dale Robertson, the rugged cowboy star best remembered for his roles in classic westerns like Tales of Wells Fargo and Iron Horse, built his career on being the tough, no-nonsense hero who always stood his ground. Off-screen, Dale's reputation was just as firm. Known for his blunt honesty and refusal to play by Hollywood's rules, he developed a reputation as a man who didn't sugarcoat his words or hide his true feelings. While he earned the respect of millions of fans and many fellow actors, there was one figure in particular who seemed to draw his sharpest dislike. In fact, those close to him have often said that if Dale Robertson truly hated anyone, it was this one person. But who was it, and why did the famously private star feel such deep disdain? To answer this, we need to revisit Robertson's life, his values, and the behind-the-scenes clashes that revealed a side of him few people ever saw. Dale Robertson's life was never one of pretense or manufactured charm. Long before Hollywood scripts turned him into the rugged cowboy hero millions came to admire, he was already living by a personal code shaped by hardship, honor, and survival. Born in Hara, Oklahoma in 1923, Dale grew up in an environment where hard work wasn't a choice. It was a way of life. He was raised during the Great Depression, when his family, like so many others, had to scrape by with very little. That early struggle forged in him an unshakable sense of resilience. Dale quickly learned that your word was your bond, and respect wasn't given, it was earned. When World War II came, Robertson didn't hesitate to serve. He joined the U.S. Army, and his time in uniform left an indelible mark on his character. He was a combat veteran who endured real danger overseas, sustaining injuries in service to his country. These experiences hardened his belief in loyalty and camaraderie. For Dale, honesty wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. You had to know you could rely on the man standing beside you, and in turn, you had to prove yourself reliable. That wartime mindset never left him, even after Hollywood came calling. Robertson's Hollywood career almost happened by accident. While recovering from his injuries, he posed for a photograph to send to his mother, only for that photo to catch the attention of talent scouts. Before long, he found himself in front of the cameras. But unlike many of his peers who studied acting in prestigious schools or carefully groomed themselves for stardom, Dale didn't see acting as a way to reinvent himself. He carried into the industry the same principles that had guided him as a soldier and as an Oklahoma farm boy, and that's exactly what set him apart. While other stars played cowboys, Robertson was a cowboy, straightforward, stoic, and uncompromising. He treated his roles as extensions of his real-life values, which is why audiences believed him. Whether he was portraying Jim Hardy in Tales of Wells Fargo or railroad executive Ben Calhoun in Iron Horse, fans saw a man who didn't need to pretend to be rugged. He simply was. But Dale's honesty came with a cost. Hollywood was a place where charm, networking, and sometimes deception paved the way to success. Producers expected compliance, and directors often wanted actors to flatter egos to keep the peace. Robertson wasn't built that way. If he thought someone was cutting corners or disrespecting the cast and crew, he said so. If he didn't like how things were being handled, he made his displeasure known. This refusal to bend earned him a reputation as both admired and, at times, difficult. Colleagues who worked closely with Robertson often described him as a man's man, someone you could trust with your life. He was fiercely loyal to those who earned his respect and quick to defend the underdog. But at the same time, he had no patience for arrogance or dishonesty. He had seen too much of life's real struggles to tolerate people who took advantage of others for fame or fortune. This set the foundation for the animosity he would develop later in his career. Dale didn't dislike people lightly. His Oklahoma upbringing and wartime service taught him that grudges weren't worth holding unless they were tied to a matter of principle. So when Dale Robertson eventually found someone he truly despised, it wasn't a passing irritation. It was the culmination of everything he stood against. His cowboy code left no room for pretense, and that made his hatred all the more intense. Dale Robertson entered Hollywood with the same straight-shooting mindset he carried from the Army and the Oklahoma Plains. But the industry he stepped into couldn't have been more different from the world he knew. In Hollywood, reputations were built on image, flattery, and compromise. For many actors, success depended less on talent and more on who you knew, how charming you were at parties, or how well you could play along with the unwritten rules of studio politics. That was never Dale Robertson's style. He wasn't about to pretend to like someone he didn't, and he certainly wasn't going to sacrifice his principles just to advance his career. From the start, he was outspoken about his distaste for arrogance in the entertainment world. Robertson valued respect above all else, and he expected it to be mutual. When he came across fellow actors who treated stagehands, stuntmen, or extras as beneath them, it rubbed him the wrong way. Dale had grown up around working-class people, and he never forgot that. In his eyes, every person on a film or television set contributed to the finished product, whether they were in front of the camera or behind it. Anyone who ignored that truth immediately landed on his bad side. Producers sometimes clashed with him as well. Dale was known to push back against changes in scripts or directions he felt compromised the integrity of a story. He wasn't the kind of actor who nodded politely and followed orders just for the paycheck. If he thought the material was weak, or if he felt a project was more about profit than about craft, he made his voice heard. That earned him respect from some directors who admired his passion, but it also made him unpopular with others who preferred actors to be agreeable and compliant. One particular trait that separated Robertson from many of his contemporaries was his complete lack of interest in Hollywood's social scene. While other stars attended endless parties, courting publicity and shaking hands with studio heads, Dale kept to himself. He wasn't drawn to the glamour or the flashing cameras. He was more comfortable on his ranch with his horses than at a red carpet gala. This refusal to play the game of Hollywood politics frustrated certain executives, who saw him as uncooperative or even ungrateful. Among fellow actors, he also had run-ins with those who embodied the qualities he despised most: vanity, dishonesty, and selfishness. Robertson couldn't abide by people who acted one way on screen, playing noble heroes or honorable men, only to behave like tyrants when the cameras stopped rolling. That kind of hypocrisy made his blood boil. Still, it's important to note that Dale wasn't a man who handed out his dislike freely. He had many friends in the industry who respected him deeply, and he returned that respect wholeheartedly. But for those who crossed him, whether through arrogance, dishonesty, or exploitation, he had no problem letting them know exactly how he felt. He wasn't the type to fake a smile or pretend for the sake of keeping the peace. If Dale Robertson didn't like you, you knew it. These Hollywood clashes over time built his reputation as both a fiercely principled man and someone who could be difficult to work with. Yet behind that so-called difficulty was something far more admirable: integrity. He lived by the same cowboy code he portrayed on screen, and he expected others to meet him with that same level of respect and authenticity. And when he finally came across one figure in Hollywood who seemed to embody everything he detested: ego, dishonesty, and a lack of respect, it sparked one of the few genuine hatreds of his life. In Hollywood, grudges often flare up and fade quickly. Rivalries between actors might make for gossip in the tabloids, but more often than not, those tensions are smoothed over for the sake of future projects. Dale Robertson was different. If he disliked someone, it wasn't because of petty competition or a bruised ego. It was because that person represented values that clashed directly with his code. And among the many actors, directors, and producers he crossed paths with, there was one figure who stood out as the embodiment of everything Dale despised. This individual was arrogant, self-serving, and dismissive of the people around him. To Dale, that was unforgivable. He had always believed that respect had to flow both ways, whether you were a star or a stagehand. Yet this man seemed to live by a different rule: that fame and power gave him the right to treat others however he pleased. Reports from the set spoke of him belittling crew members, showing up late to shoots, and demanding special treatment. To Robertson, who valued punctuality, professionalism, and humility, such behavior was intolerable. What made matters worse was the hypocrisy. On screen, this individual often played the kind of upright, noble characters that audiences adored, roles not too different from Robertson's own cowboy heroes. But behind the scenes, the stories painted a very different picture. Dale found that duplicity impossible to stomach. He had built his life and career on authenticity, never pretending to be someone he wasn't, while this man seemed to thrive on illusion. Their clashes weren't confined to whispers either. Dale was not afraid to speak his mind. If he saw behavior that disrespected the crew or diminished the integrity of the production, he said so, loudly and directly. That earned him both admiration and criticism. Admirers respected his courage to call things out. Detractors saw him as combative. But Dale didn't care about popularity contests. He cared about principles. In later interviews, when asked about difficult colleagues, Dale rarely named names. He wasn't one to seek headlines or stir up drama for attention. Yet those close to him revealed that there was indeed one person he couldn't stand more than anyone. Though Robertson remained too much of a gentleman to publicly shame him, the intensity of his dislike was no secret within the industry. Some who knew Dale believed his disdain was rooted not only in behavior but in betrayal. Robertson was fiercely loyal, and betrayal of trust was the one offense he couldn't forgive. Whether it was a broken promise, a dishonest deal, or a deliberate slight, he viewed it as a violation of the values he held sacred. And when this individual crossed that line, Dale's dislike hardened into genuine hatred. It's important to understand that Robertson's hatred wasn't fueled by jealousy or competition. He never cared about being the most famous actor in Hollywood, nor was he threatened by others' success. What offended him was character, or rather the lack of it. To Dale, being a good man was more important than being a good actor. He could forgive mistakes, but he couldn't forgive arrogance or dishonesty. The identity of the person he truly hated remains a matter of speculation. Some fans have their theories, pointing to certain figures who had reputations for difficult behavior. But whether or not the name is revealed, the truth remains. Dale Robertson's deep dislike wasn't about Hollywood rivalries. It was about principle. And for a man who lived his entire life by a cowboy code, that made his hatred far more intense and lasting than ordinary grudges. When looking back at Dale Robertson's long career, it becomes clear that his reputation was built as much on the values he stood for as on the roles he played. He wasn't just another actor who rode horses on camera. He lived the code of the cowboy in real life. His honesty, toughness, and refusal to bend to Hollywood politics earned him both admiration and enemies. And that duality is part of what made his legacy so unique. Among fans, Robertson's image was larger than life. To them, he was the rugged star who never faltered, the quiet hero who always came out on top. People who grew up watching tales of Wells Fargo or Iron Horse saw a man who represented strength and decency at a time when television often painted a cleaner picture of the world. He embodied the values that many Americans wanted to see reflected on screen: integrity, grit, and loyalty. Yet behind the scenes, Dale's principles sometimes made him a polarizing figure. He didn't hide his feelings, and when he disliked someone, he made it known. That refusal to play the Hollywood game cost him opportunities. Some producers avoided working with him because they knew he wouldn't go along to get along, but others respected him even more for it, knowing that his honesty made him trustworthy. In an industry built on illusion, Dale Robertson remained refreshingly real. His deep disdain for the man he hated more than anyone became a defining example of this. Unlike so many Hollywood rivalries that were fueled by ego or jealousy, Dale's feelings came from a place of principle. To him, arrogance, dishonesty, and betrayal were unforgivable sins. His resentment wasn't about competition, it was about character. And though he kept the details mostly private, his unwillingness to bury the grudge revealed just how seriously he took his personal code. In some ways, this resentment only added to his mystique. Fans and colleagues alike knew that Dale wasn't the kind of man to hate easily, which made the rare instances of genuine dislike all the more powerful. It showed that he wasn't just acting the part of the cowboy, he was living it, even in his grudges. A cowboy didn't forgive dishonor lightly, and neither did Dale Robertson. As the years went on, however, his legacy softened in the eyes of the public. People remembered him less for his clashes and more for the roles that inspired them. Tributes celebrated his service in World War II, his devotion to his fans, and the authenticity he brought to every role. Even those who had disagreed with him in Hollywood acknowledged that he was a man who stood firm in his beliefs, regardless of the cost. When Dale Robertson passed away in 2013, the world lost one of the last true cowboys of classic Hollywood. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he was consistent. He lived and died by the same code he had always believed in: respect, loyalty, honesty, and strength. The grudges he carried, including the one that burned brighter than all the others, were part of that code. They weren't petty, and they weren't for show. They were the inevitable result of a man who refused to compromise on principle. In the end, Dale Robertson's legacy is a balance of admiration and resentment. He inspired millions with his characters, won respect with his service, and left behind stories of clashes that proved his authenticity. Even his hatred, rare, sharp, and unforgettable, was proof of how deeply he cared about living a life of honor.